Welcome to the channel, everyone, and this is Let's Play MTG. And here on this channel, we will abilities twice, use electrostatic plumber, and so you don't necessarily need to have. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. This is Anthony Lee with Let's Play MTG. So today we're going to go ahead and go over all the full spoiled list of the Innistrad Midnight Hunt cards. I right now am on the skyfall.com to get all the spoilers and be able to show you the front and back of all the double-sided cards. So let's go ahead and get on into it on this little bit of a longer video for the spoilers for Innistrad Midnight Hunt. So first off, we have Curse of Shaken Faith, an enchantment or a curse for 1 in a red. It says enchant player. When enchanted player casts a spell other than the first spell they cast each turn, or copies a spell, Curse of Shaken Faith deals 2 damage to them. So it definitely goes into a burn style deck, or can be a burn style deck, or a curse deck. Next up, we have Storm of the Festival. It is a sorcery for 3 and 3 green. It says look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may put up to 2 permanent cards with mana value 5 or less from among them onto the battlefield. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order and flashback for 7 and 3 green. This card is 2 green more than the Collected Company, but it's permanents. So they could be lands, they could be enchantments, artifacts, creatures, or what have you, and their mana value is increased by 2. Storm the Festival is good because it has 3 mana of green in it. It would be a little bit harder to cast on anything outside of 2 colors. So for mono green, it's actually really good. Anyway, next up we have the Triskaidekaphile. It's a human wizard. It costs 1 and a blue for a 1/3. It says you have no maximum hand size. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you have exactly 13 cards in your hand, you win the game. And then for 3 a blue, draw a card. So this card is a new WinCon card. Next up, we have Tireless Hauler. It's a human werewolf for 4 and a green. That is a 4/5 with Vigilance and Daybound. So if it's day, it's on the Daybound side. If it's night, it goes to the Nightbound side. And so looking at the Nightbound side, it becomes Dire Strain Brawler. Creature werewolf, that's a 6/6 with Vigilance and Nightbound. Next up, we have Tovolar's Huntmaster. It's a human werewolf that costs 4 and 2 green for a 6/6 creature. Whenever Tovolar Huntmaster enters the battlefield, create 2 2/2 green wolf creature tokens, and it has Daybound. So flipping over to Nightbound, it becomes Tovolar's Pack Leader. Whenever Tovolar's Pack Leader enters the battlefield or attacks, create 2 2/2 green wolf creature tokens. And then for 2 and 2 green, another wolf or werewolf you control fights target creature you don't control, and it has Nightbound. Next up is Shady Traveler. It's a human werewolf for 2 and a black for a 2/3. It has Menace and Daybound. On the back side, it becomes Stalking Predator with Menace Nightbound for a 4/4. Next card is Storm Strelix. It is a Drake Horror that costs 3, a blue, and a red. It's a 2/4 creature that has flying. An instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, which is definitely nice. And whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, Storm Strelix gets +2/+0 till end of turn. So the more spells you play, or in some cases a storm style type deck, it can definitely get really big, and with a decreased cost, it's definitely can be a pretty effective strategy. Next up, we have a reprint of Plummet that's been reprinted a lot. It is an instant that costs 1 and a green. It says destroy target creature with flying. Next card is Lambholt's Harrier. It is a wolf that costs 1 and a red. It's a 2/2 creature. And for 3 and a red, target creature can't block this turn. Next up, we have Outlander Liberator. It is a human werewolf for 1 and a green. That's a 2/2. And for 1, it's sacrifice Outland Liberator. Destroy target artifact or enchantment with Daybound. And on the backside, it becomes Frenzy Trapbreaker. For 1, and sacrifice Frenzy Trapbreaker. Destroy target artifact or enchantment. Whenever Frenzy Trapbreaker attacks, destroy target artifact or enchantment defending player controls, and it has Nightbound. Next up, we have Tireless Hauler. It's a human werewolf for 4 and a green for a 4/5. It has Vigilance and Daybound. On the backside, it becomes Dire Strain Brawler. Werewolf has Vigilance and Nightbound for a 6/6. Next card is Festtide Infiltrator. Human werewolf for 2 and a red. Has Trample and Daybound for a 3/2. And on the backside it becomes Harvesttide Assailant for Trample and Nightbound for a 4/4. Next card is Lord of the Forsaken. It's a demon that costs 4 and 2 black for a 6/6. It has Flying and Trample, and black, sacrifice another creature. Target player mills 3 cards. And you can pay 1 life to add colorless to mana pool. Spend this mana only to cast spells from your graveyard. So this could be definitely an aristocrat style deck, or it could also be in a mill slash aristocrats, really depending on what you want to do with this creature. We have a reprint of Evolving Wilds. It's a land that just taps to sacrifice itself. Search your library for a basic land card, put it on the battlefield tapped. Then we have Silverbolt. It's an artifact that costs 1 and 3, tap and sacrifice it. It deals 3 damage to target creature. If it's a werewolf, it deals damage. If a werewolf has dealt damage this way, destroy it. Next up, we have Crossroads Candle Guide. It is an artifact creature Scarecrow for 4. Whenever Crossroads Candle Guide enters the battlefield, exile up to 1 target card from a graveyard. And then you can pay 2 to add 1 mana of any color. It's a 3/4 creature, so could kind of help mana fix you a little bit, and then help get rid of cards in graveyards. Next is Timberland Guide. It is a human scout. It costs 1 and a green. Whenever Timberland Guide enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Next card is Tapping at the Window. Sorcery for 1 and a green. Look at the top 3 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest into your graveyard, and it has flashback for 2 and a green. Next card is Shadow Beast's Sighting. Sorcery for 3 and a green. Create a 4/4 green beast creature token with flashback 6 and a green. Next card is Harvesttide Infiltrator. Has Trample and Daybound for a 3/2. Flip it over as Harvesttide Assailant. This is actually, yeah, this is the same card, so sorry about that. Next card is Return to Nature, which is a reprint. It's an instant that costs 1 and a green. Choose 1, destroy target artifact, destroy target enchantment, or exile target card from a graveyard. Next card is Harvesttide Sentry. It's a human warrior for 1 and a green for a 3/1. It has Coven. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if you control 3 or more creatures with different powers, Harvesttide Sentry can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less this turn. Next we have, I believe we've done Shady Traveler. Yes, we sure have. So let's go ahead and go to Bramble Armor. It's an artifact equipment for 1 and a green. When Bramble Armor enters the battlefield, attached to target creature you control. Equipped creature gets +2/+1 and equips for 4. Next up, we have Ecstatic Awakener. It's a human wizard that costs a single black for 1/1. And 2 black, sacrifice another creature, draw a card, then transform Ecstatic Awakener, activate only once each turn. And when you transform him, he becomes a Awoken Demon. Demon creature as a 4/4. Next card is Bounding Wolf. It is a wolf creature that costs 2 and a green with flash and reach for a 3/2. Next card we have Gale Drifter. It's a hippogriff. Costs 3 and a blue for a 3/2 with flying and disturb for 4 and a blue. You may cast this card from your graveyard transform for its disturb cost. So on its transform side it becomes a Whale Drifter. It is a hippogriff spirit with flying. If Whale Drifter would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead, and it is a 2/2. Next card is Morning Patrol. It's a human soldier that costs 2 and a white for a 2/3 with vigilance and disturb 3. So transformed it is Morning Apparition. It's a 2/1 with flying vigilance. If Morning Apparition would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. Next card we have Lunarch Veteran, human cleric that costs a single white for a 1/1. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life. So we've definitely seen this ability quite a bit, and if you play in the arena, you see this kind of ability all over the place. Then it has Disturb for 1 and a white. So on the transform side, it becomes a Luminous Phantom. It's a Spirit Cleric for 1/1. And flying, whenever another creature you control leaves the battlefield, you gain 1 life. If Luminous Phantom would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. Next card is Ambitious Farmhand. It is a human peasant for 1 and a white for a 1/1. Whenever Ambitious Farmhand enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a basic Plains card, reveal it and put it into your hand, then shuffle. It has Coven for 1 and 2 white. Transform Ambitious Farmhand. Activate only if you control 3 or more creatures with different powers. On the transform side, it becomes Seasoned Cather. It is a human knight as a 3/3 with lifelink. Next up is Valdarin Stinger. It's a vampire warrior that only costs a single black for a 1/1. Whenever Valdarin Stinger has first strike as long as it's attacking. For 2 and a red, Valdarin Stinger gets +2/+0 till end of turn. Next card is Stolen Vitality. It's an instant that costs 1 and a red. Target creature gets +3/+1 till end of turn. If it's your turn, that creature gains trample until end of turn. Otherwise, it gains first strike until end of turn. Next card is Raise the Effigy. It's an instant that costs a single red. It says choose 1, destroy target artifact, or target attacking creature gets +2/+2 till end of turn. Next card is Pax Betrayal. It's a sorcery for 2 and a red. Gain control of target creature until end of turn. Untap that creature. It gains haste until end of turn. If you control a wolf or werewolf, scry 2. Next card is Neonate's Rush. Instant for 2 and a red. This spell costs 1 less to cast if you control a vampire. Neonate's Rush deals 1 damage to target creature and 1 damage to its controller. Draw a card. Next card is Mounted Dread Knight. It is a vampire knight that costs 4 and a red for a 5/4. It has trample, and whenever Mounted Dread Knight enters the battlefield, it enters with a +1/+1 counter on it if an opponent lost life this turn. Next is Moonrager's Slash. It's an instant for 2 and a red. This spell costs 2 less to cast if it's night. Moonrager's Slash deals 3 damage to any target. Electric Revelation. It's an instant for 2 and a red. As an additional cost to cast this spell, discard a card, draw 2 cards with flashback, 3 and a red. Next card is Burn the Accused. Instant for 4 and a red. Burn the Accused deals 5 damage to target creature and 2 damage to that creature's controller. If that creature would die this turn, exile it instead. Next card is Ardent Elementalist. It's a human shaman for 3 and a red. When Ardent Elementalist enters the battlefield, return target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. Next up is Abandon the Post, sorcery for 1 and a red. Up to 2 target creatures can't block this turn, flashback for 3 and a red. Next up is Vampire Interloper. It's a vampire scout that costs 1 and a black for a 2/1. It has flying and Vampire Interloper cannot block. Next card is Rotten Reunion. It's an instant for a single black, exile up to 1 target card from a graveyard. Create a 2/2 black zombie creature token with Decayed, which is it cannot block. When it attacks, sacrifice it at the end of combat, and it has flashback for 1 and a black. Next card is Olivia's Midnight Ambush. It's an instant for 1 and a black. Target creature gets -2/-2 until end of turn. If it's night, that creature gets -13/-13 until end of turn instead. Next up is Novice Occultist. It's a human wizard for 1 and a black for a 1/2. When Novice Occultist dies, you draw a card and lose 1 life. Next card is No Way Out, a sorcery for 2 and a black. Target opponent discards 2 cards. You create a 2/2 black zombie creature token with Decayed. Next card is Morkrit Behemoth. It's a zombie giant for 4 and a black for a 7/6. As an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice a creature or pay 1 and a black. It has Menace. Next up is a reprint of Duress. It's a sorcery for a single black. Target opponent reveals their hand. You choose a non-creature, non-land card from it. That player discards that card. Next up is Crawl from the Cellar. It's a sorcery for a single black. Return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Put a +1/+1 counter on up to 1 target zombie you control. That has flashback for 3 and a black. Next is Blood Pact. It's an instant that costs 2 and a black. Target player draws 2 cards and loses 2 life. Next card is Bat Whisperer. It's a vampire for 3 and a black for a 4/2. When Bat Whisperer enters the battlefield, if an opponent lost life this turn, create a 1/1 black bat creature token with flying. So this is definitely a type of card that you would usually want to play on second main. Next card is Unblinking Observer. It's a homunculus that costs 1 and a blue for a 2/1. Tap, add blue. Spend this mana only to pay a disturb cost or cast an instant or sorcery spell. Next up is Shipwreck Sifters. It's a spirit for 1 and a blue. When Shipwreck Sifters enters the battlefield, draw a card, then discard a card. Whenever you discard a spirit card or a card with Disturb, put a +1/+1 counter on Shipwreck Sifters, and it's a 1/2 creature. Next up is Ravage of the Drowned. It's an instant that costs 3 and a black. Target creature's owner puts it on the top or bottom of their library. You create a 2/2 black zombie creature token with Decay. Yeah, that's just a really weird worded card. I'm sorry, but target creature's owner puts it on the top or bottom of their library. What are they putting? The instant? Yeah, I'm not. That's a really poorly worded card. Next up is Otherworldly Gaze. It's an instant that costs a single blue. Look at the top 3 cards of your library. Put any number of them in your graveyard and the rest back on top of your library in any order. Flashback for 1 and a blue. Next up is Geist Wave. Instant for 1 and a blue. Return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. If you control that permanent, draw a card. Next up is Flip the Switch. It's an instant for 2 and a blue. Counter target spell unless its controller pays 4. Create a 2/2 black zombie creature token with Decayed. Next up is Falcon Abomination. It's a zombie bird for 2 and a blue. That's a 2/2 with flying, and when Falcon Abomination enters the battlefield, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token with Decayed. Next card is Drownyard Amalgam. It's a zombie horror for 4 and a blue for a 3/6. When Drownyard Amalgam enters the battlefield, target player mills 3 cards. For 2 and a blue, Drownyard Amalgam can't be blocked this turn. Next up is Devious Cover-Up. It's an instant for 2 and 2 blue. Counter target spell. If that spell is countered this way, exile it instead of putting it into the owner's graveyard. You may shuffle up to 4 target cards from your graveyard into your library. Next card we have is Component Collector. It's an Homunculus for 2 and a blue for a 1/4. If it's neither day or night, it becomes day as Component Collector enters the battlefield. Whenever day becomes night or night becomes day, you may tap or untap target non-land permanent. Next card is Sigarda Splendor. It's an enchantment for 2 and 2 white. As Sigarda Splendor enters the battlefield, note your life total. At the beginning of your upkeep, draw a card if your life total is greater than or equal to the last noted life total for Sigarda Splendor. Then note your life total. Whenever you cast a white spell, you gain 1 life. Next card is Soul Guide Gryph. It's a Hippogriff Spear for 4 and white. For a 3/4, it has flying. And when Soul Guide Gryph enters the battlefield, exile up to 1 target card from a graveyard. Next card is Search Party Captain. It's a human soldier for 3 and white. This spell costs 1 less to cast for each creature you attacked with this turn. When Search Party Captain enters the battlefield, draw a card. Next up, we have Homestead Courage. It's a sorcery for a single white. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. It gains vigilance till end of turn. Flashback for a white. Next is Gavany Trapper. It's a human soldier for a single white for a 0/2. And it has 2 tap target creature. Next is Gavany Silversmith. It's a human soldier for 3 and a white for a 2/3. When Gavany Silversmith enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures. Next we have Curse of Silence. It's an enchantment or a curse for a single white. Enchant player, as Curse of Silence enters the battlefield, choose a card name. Spells with a chosen name enchanted player cast cost 2 more to cast. Whenever enchanted player casts a spell with a chosen name, you may sacrifice Curse of Silence. If you do, draw a card. Dual Craft Trainer is a human soldier for 3 and a white for a 3/3. It has First Strike and Coven. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if you control 3 or more creatures with different powers, target creature you control gains double strike until end of turn. Next up is Clarion Cathars. It's a human knight for 3 and a white for a 3/3. When Clarion Cathars enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 white human creature token. Next up is Cathar's Call. Enchantment aura for 2 and a white. Enchant creature. Enchanted creature has vigilance, and at the beginning of your end step, create a 1/1 white human creature token. Next card is Cathar Commando. It's a human soldier for 1 and a white. has a 3/1. It has flash and 1. Sacrifice Cathar Commando, destroy target, artifact, or enchantment. Next card is Path to the Festival. It's a sorcery for 2 and a green. It says search your library for a basic land card. Put that card onto the battlefield, tap, then shuffle. Then if there are 3 or more basic land types among the lands you control, scry 1, and has flashback for 4 and a green. This is really kind of an overly expensive ramp card that I don't think it's going to see much play in Commander. Next up, we have Eccentric Farmer. It's a human peasant for 2 and a green for a 2/3. When Eccentric Farmer enters the battlefield, mill 3 cards. Then you may return a land card from your graveyard to your hand. Next up is Blessed Defense, or Blessed Defiance. It's an instant for a single white. Target creature you control gets +2/+0 and gains lifelink till end of turn. When that creature dies this turn, create a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying. Alright, next card is Winterhorn Blessing for a green and a blue. It's a sorcery. Put a +1/+1 counter on up to 1 target creature you control. Tap up to 1 target creature you don't control, and that creature doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step, and has flashback for 1, a green, and a blue. And then we've already done Lord of the Forsaken. Next card is Obsessive Astronomer. It is a human wizard for 1 and a red for a 2/2. If it's neither day or night, it becomes day as Obsessive Astronomer enters the battlefield. Whenever day becomes night or night becomes day, discard up to 2 cards, then draw that many cards. Next is Jaren Corrupted Bishop. It's a human cleric for 2 and a black for a 2/3. Whenever Jaren Corrupted Bishop enters the battlefield or another non-token human you control dies, you lose 1 life and create a 1/1 white human creature token. You can pay 2 and target human you control gains lifelink till end of turn. And then at the beginning of your end step, if you have exactly 13 life, you may pay 4 and 2 black if you do transform Jaren. So on the back side, he is Ormondal the Corruptor. Legendary creature demon as a 6/6 with flying, trample, lifelink, and sacrifice another creature, draw a card. And then next card is Drumkirk Blood Thief. It's a vampire rogue. It costs 2 and a black for a 2/2. At the beginning of your end step, if an opponent lost life this turn, put a +1/+1 counter on target vampire you control. We've already went over the Tovolar's Huntmaster, which flips over to the Tovolar Pack Leader. Next up, we have a Malevolent Hermit. It's a human wizard for 1 and a blue. It's a 2/1. With blue, sacrifice Malevolent Hermit, counter target non-creature spell unless its controller pays 3, and it has Disturb for 2 and a blue. Transform it as Benevolent Geist. It's a 2/2 flying spirit wizard. Non-creature spells you control can't be countered. If Benevolent Geist would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. Next is Fateful Absence. It's an instant for 1 and a white. Destroy target creature or planeswalker its controller investigates. Next up, we'll go to Primal Adversary. It's a wolf that costs 2 and a green for a 4/3. It has trample. And when Primal Adversary enters the battlefield, you may pay 1 and a green any number of times. When you pay this cost 1 or more times, put that many +1/+1 counters on Primal Adversary. Then up to that many target lands you control become 3/3 wolf creatures with haste that are still lands. Next card is Blood Tithe Collector. It's a vampire noble for 4 and a black for a 3/4. Has flying, and when Blood Tithe Collector enters the battlefield, if an opponent lost life this turn, each opponent discards a card. Next card is Vengeful Strangler. It's a human rogue for 1 and a black for a 2/1. Vengeful Strangler can't block. When Vengeful Strangler dies, return it to the battlefield, transform under your control, attached to target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls. It transforms into Strangling Grasp. So it has an enchantment aura. Enchant creature or planeswalker an opponent controls. At the beginning of your upkeep, enchanted permanence controller sacrifices a non-land permanent and loses 1 life. Next card we have is Death Bonnet Sprout. It's a fungus, costs a single green for a 1/1. At the beginning of your upkeep, mill a card. Then if there are 3 or more cards in your graveyard, transform Death Bonnet Sprout. It transforms to Death Bonnet Hulk. As a fungus horror for a 3/3. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may exile a card from a graveyard. If a creature card was exiled this way, put a +1/+1 counter on Death Bonnet Hulk. Next card we have is Vivisection. It's a sorcery for 3 and a blue. Has an additional cost to cast this spell. Sacrifice a creature. Draw 3 cards. Next card is Hallowed Respite. It's a sorcery that costs a white and a blue. Exile target non-legendary creature, then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. If it entered under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on it, otherwise tap it. And it has flashback for 1, a white, and a blue. Next card is Smoldering Egg. It's a dragon egg for 1 and a red as a 0/4 with Defender, and whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, put a number of Ember counters on Smoldering Egg equal to the amount of mana spent to cast that spell. Then if Smoldering Egg has 7 or more Ember counters on it, remove them and transform Smoldering Egg. Transformed, it becomes Ashmouth Dragon. Creature Dragon has a 4/4 with flying, and whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, Ashmouth Dragon deals 2 damage to any target. Next up, we have Bloodline Calling. It's an instant that costs 1 and 2 black. It says choose 1, target creature gets -5/-5 until end of turn, or creature tokens get -2/-2 till end of turn. Next up is Sunstreak Phoenix. It's a Phoenix for 2 and 2 red for a 4/2. It has flying. If it's neither day or night, it becomes day as Sunstreak Phoenix enters the battlefield. Whenever day becomes night or night becomes day, you may pay 1 and a red. If you do, return Sunstreak Phoenix from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Next card is Burn Down the House. As a sorcery for 3 and 2 red. It says choose 1, burn down the house, deals 5 damage to each creature and each planeswalker, or create 3 1/1 red devil creature tokens when this creature dies, it deals 1 damage to any target. They gain haste until end of turn. Next card is Memory Deluge. It's an instant for 2 and 2 blue. Look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the amount of mana spent to cast a spell. Put 2 of them into your hand and the rest to the bottom of the library in a random order. Flashback for 5 and 2 blue. Next card is the Meat Hook Massacre. It's a legendary enchantment for X and 2 black. When the Meat Hook Massacre enters the battlefield, each creature gets -X/-X till end of turn. Whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life. Whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, you gain 1 life. Next up, we have Cathartic Pyre. It's an instant for 1 and a red. Choose 1. Cathartic Pyre deals 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker, or discard up to 2 cards, then draw that many cards. Next up is Fading Hope. It's an instant for a single blue. Return target creature to its owner's hand. If its mana value was 3 or less, scry 1. Next card up, we have Angel Fire Ignition. It's a sorcery that costs 1, a red and a white. Put 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature. It gains Vigilance, Trample, Lifelink, Indestructible, and Haste till end of turn, which is, wow, that's pretty powerful. And it has Flashback for 2, a red and a white. Next we have Sunrise Cavalier. It's a human knight for 1, a red and a white for a 3/3. It has Trample and Haste, and if it's neither day or night, it becomes day as Sunrise Cavalier enters the battlefield. Whenever day becomes night or night becomes day, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Next card we have Firmament Sage. It's a human wizard for 3 and a blue for a 2/3. If it's neither night or day, it becomes day as Firmament Sage enters the battlefield. Whenever day becomes night or night becomes day, draw a card. Next is Phantom Carriage. It's a spear that costs 4 and 2 blue for a 4/4 that has flying. And when Phantom Carriage enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a card with Flashback or Disturb. Put that card into your graveyard, then shuffle. Next card is Dreadhound. It's a demon dog that costs 4 and 2 black for a 6/6. When Dreadhound enters the battlefield, mill 3 cards. When a creature dies or a creature card is put into a graveyard from a library, each opponent loses 1 life. Next card is Florian Valdarin Scion. Legendary creature, Vampire Noble for 1, a black and a red for a 3/3 with first strike, and at the beginning of your post-combat main phase, look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the total amount of life your opponent lost this turn. Exile one of those cards and put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. You may play the exiled card this turn. See, Storm the Festival is something we already looked at. So the next card would be Denic Pious Apprentice, legendary creature, human soldier for a white and a blue for a 2/3 with lifelink, and cards in graveyards can't be the targets of spells or abilities. It has Disturb for 2, a white and a blue. So when it transforms, it becomes Denic Pious Apparition, and a Spirit Soldier as a 3/2. With flying, and whenever 1 or more creature cards are put into a graveyard from anywhere, investigate. This ability triggers only 1 string each turn. Investigate, you create a colorless clue artifact token with pay 2, sacrifice this artifact, draw a card. If Denic Pious Apparition would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. Next up, we have Dawnheart Wardens. It's a human warlock for 1, a white and a green for a 3/3 with vigilance and coven. At the beginning of your combat on your turn, if you control 3 or more creatures with different powers, creatures you control get +1/+0 till end of turn. Next card is Seize the Storm, sorcery for 4 and a red. It says create a red elemental creature token with trample, and this creature's power and toughness are each equal to the number of instant and sorcery cards in your graveyard, plus the number of cards with flashback you own in exile, and it has flashback for 6 and a red. Next up is Slaughter Specialist. It's a vampire warrior for 1 and a black for a 3/3, with when Slaughter Specialist enters the battlefield, each opponent creates a 1/1 white human creature token. And whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Slaughter Specialist. Next up is Unnatural Moonrise. It's sorcery for a red and a green. It becomes night. Until end of turn, target creature gets +1/+0 and gains trample. And whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. And then flashback for 2, a red and a green. Next up, we have Hound Tamer. It's a human werewolf for 2 and a green for a 3/3 with trample, and 3 and a green. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature and daybound. On the Nightbound side, it is Untamed Pup for a 4/4 werewolf. It has Trample, and other wolves and werewolves you control have Trample. And for 3 and a green, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature and Nightbound. Next card is Morbid Opportunist. It's a human rogue that costs 2 and a black for a 1/3. With whenever one or more creatures die, draw a card. This ability triggers only once each turn. Next card is Brave Survivor. It's a human peasant for 2 and a white for a 2/1. Whenever another creature you control dies, transform Brave Survivor. And it transforms into Dauntless Avenger, human soldier, 3/2. Whenever Dauntless Avenger attacks, return target creature with converted mana value 2 or less from a graveyard to the battlefield, tapped and attacking. Next up is Rite of Oblivion. It's a sorcery for a white and a black. As an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice a non-land permanent. Exile target non-land permanent, and flashback for 2, a white and a black. Next card up we have is Vanquish the Horde. It's a sorcery that costs 6 and 2 white. That says this spell costs 1 less to cast for each creature on the battlefield, and then destroy all creatures. So you could potentially, especially in Commander, possibly play 2 white, 2 board white. Next up we have Curse of Surveillance. It's an enchantment or a curse for 4 and a blue. With enchant player at the beginning of enchanted player's upkeep, any number of target players other than that player each draw cards equal to the number of curses attached to that player. Next up we have Mask of Gristlebrand. It's a legendary artifact equipment for 1 and 2 black. Equipped creature has flying and lifelink. Whenever equipped creature dies, you may pay X life, where X is its power. If you do draw X cards, equip 3. Next card is Willowgeist. It's a tree folk spirit for a single green as a 1/1. It has trample, and whenever one or more cards leaves your graveyard, put a +1/+1 counter on Willowgeist. When Willowgeist dies, you gain life equal to its power. Next up, we have Dire Strain Rampage. Sorcery for 1, a red and green. It says destroy target artifact, enchantment, or land. If a land was destroyed this way, its controller may search their library for 2 basic land cards and put them on the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. Otherwise, its controller may search their library for a basic land card and put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. Flashback, 3 red and green. Next up is a reprint of Field of Ruin. It says tap, add colorless, or pay 2, tap, and sacrifice Field of Ruin. Destroy target non-basic land an opponent controls. Each player searches their library for a basic land card and puts it onto the battlefield, then shuffles. Next card is Wake to Slaughter. It's a sorcery that costs 3 black and a red. It says choose up to 2 target creatures in your graveyard. An opponent chooses one of them, return that card to your hand. Return the other to the battlefield under your control. It gains haste, exile it at the beginning of the next end step, and flashback for 4, a black and a red. Next up, we have a Planeswalker. It is Teferi, who slows the sunset. Legendary Planeswalker Teferi for 2, a white and a blue. Comes into play with 4 loyalty counters on it. And +1, choose up to 1 target artifact, up to 1 target creature, and up to 1 target land. Untap the chosen permanents you control. Tap the chosen permanents you don't control. You gain 2 life. -2, look at the top 3 cards of your library. Put 1 of them into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. -7, you get an emblem. With untap all permanents you control during each opponent's untap step, and you draw a card during each opponent's draw step. So that is a really powerful ultimate. Next card is Spellrune Painter. It's a human shaman werewolf for 2 and a red for a 2/3. With whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, Spellrune Painter gets +1/+1 till end of turn, and it has Daybound. On the Nightbound side, it turns to Spellrune Howler, creature werewolf 3/4. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, Spellrunner Howler gets +2/+2 till end of turn, has Nightbound. Next card is Reckless Stormseeker. It's a human werewolf for 2 and a red for a 2/3. At the beginning of combat on your turn, target creature you control gets +1/+0 and gains haste until end of turn and has Daybound. On Nightbound, it becomes Storm-Charged Slasher Werewolf as a 3/4 with, at the beginning of combat on your turn, target creature you control gets +2/+0 and gains Trample and Haste until end of turn with Nightbound. Siphon Insight's an instant for a blue and a black. It says look at the top 2 cards of target opponent's library, exile one of them face down and put the other on the bottom of that library. You may look and play the card exiled for as long as it remains exiled, and you may spend mana as though it were any mana of any color to cast that spell, and has flashback for 1, a blue, and a black. Next card is Jack-O-Lantern. It's an artifact that costs 1. You can pay 1 tap and sacrifice Jack-O-Lantern. Exile up to 1 target card from a graveyard, draw a card. Or pay 1 exile Jack-O-Lantern from your graveyard, add 1 mana of any color. Next up we have Eaten Alive. Eaten Alive is a sorcery for a single black. Has an additional cost to cast this spell. Sacrifice a creature or pay 3 and a black. Exile target creature or planeswalker. Next up we have Blade Brand. It's an instant that costs 1 and a black. Target creature gains Death Touch till end of turn and draw a card. Next up we have Organ Hoarder. It's 3 and a blue for a 3/2 zombie. When Organ Hoarder enters the battlefield, look at the top 3 cards of your library, then put 1 of them into your hand and the rest into your graveyard. After that is Sigordian Survivor. It's an angel for 3 and 2 white as a 3/3. It has flying, and whenever Sigordian Survivor enters the battlefield, if you cast it, return up to 2 target creature cards with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Next up is Threaben Exorcism. It's an instant for 1 and a white, exile target spirit, creature with disturb or enchantment. Next up is the Catilda Dawnheart Prime. It is a legendary creature human warlock for a green and a white as a 1/1, protection from werewolves, and human creatures you control have tap, add 1 mana of any of this creature's colors. And then for a 4, a white and a green, tap, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Next up, we have Ludovic Necrogenus. It is a legendary creature human wizard for a blue and a black. Whenever Ludovic Necrogenus, or Genius, enters the battlefield or attacks, mill a card. And for X and 2 blue, 2 black, exile X creature cards from your graveyard, transform Ludovic. X cannot be 0, activate only as a sorcery. So transform, he becomes Olag, Ludovic's Hubris. Legendary creature zombie as a 4/4. As this creature transforms into Olag, Ludovic's Hubris, it becomes a copy of a creature card exiled with it, except its name is Olag Ludovic's Hubris. It's 4/4, and it's legendary blue and black zombie in addition to its other colors and types. Put a +1/+1 counter on Oleg equal to the number of creature cards exiled with it. Next up is Rem Carlos, Stalwart Slayer. It's a legendary creature human knight for 1, a red and a white as a 2/3, has flying and haste. If a spell would deal damage to you or another permanent you control, prevent that damage. And then if a spell would deal damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, it deals that much damage plus 1 instead. Next up we have Sakab Wrangler. It's a creature, human wizard for 1 and a blue for a 2/1. It says tap 3 untapped creatures you control, tap target creature. Next up we have Outland Liberator. It's a human werewolf for 1 and a green for a 2/2. And it has 1 and sacrifice Outland Liberator, destroy target artifact or enchantment with Daybound. I believe we actually went over, yes. We've already went over that one. We have Bird Admirer. It's a human archer werewolf for 2 and a green for a 1/4 with reach and Daybound. And on the Nightbound side is Wing Shredder with reach and Nightbound for a 3/5. Next card we have Moon Silver Key. It's an artifact that costs 2. With 1 tap, sacrifice Moon Silver Key. Search your library for an artifact card with a mana ability or a basic land card. Reveal it, put it to your hand, then shuffle. Next card is Vedric Astral Archmage. Legendary creature human wizard that costs 1, a blue and a red for a 1/2. If it's neither day or night, it becomes day as Vedric Astral Archmage enters the battlefield. Instant and sorcery spells you cast cost X lux to cast, where X is Vedric's power. Whenever day becomes night or night becomes day, put a +1/+1 counter on Vedric's. Next up, we have Lyre, Disciple of the Drown. Legendary creature human wizard for 3 and 2 blue for a 3/4. Spells cannot be countered. Each instant and sorcerer card in your graveyard has flashback. The flashback cost is equal to that card's mana cost. Next up is Slogurk the Overslime. It's a legendary creature ooze for 1 a green and a blue for a 3/3 with trample, and whenever a land card is put into your graveyard from anywhere, put a +1/+1 counter on Slogurk the Overslime. Remove 3 +1/+1 counters from Slogurk. Return it to its owner's hand. When Slogurk leaves the battlefield, return up to 3 target land cards from your graveyard to your hand. Next up we have Stuffed Bear. It's an artifact that costs 2. You can pay 2 and Stuffed Bear becomes a 4/4 green bear artifact creature till end of turn. Next up we have Sigarda's Splendor. It's an enchantment for 2 and 2 white. As Sigarda's Splendor enters the battlefield, note your life total. And oh, we actually already went over that one. Alright. So we're getting there. We still have quite a bit left, but we're making a dent in the list so far. Next card is Arcane Infusion. It's an instant for a blue and a red. Look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal an instant or sorcery card from among them and put it to your hand. Put the rest at the bottom of your library in a random order. Flashback for 3, a blue and a red. Next card after that is Falconwrath Perforator. It's a vampire, costs 1 and a red for a 2/1. Whenever Falconwrath Perforator attacks, it deals 1 damage to defending player. Next up is Spellrune Painter. It's a human shaman werewolf for 2 and a red for a 2/3 that says whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, Spellrune Painter gets +1/+1 till end of turn, and it has Daybound. Nightbound side, it becomes Spellrune Howler. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, it gets +2/+2 till end of turn as a 3/4 creature with Nightbound. Reckless Stormseeker. Yeah, we actually went over that. Next is Suspicious Stowaway. It's a human rogue werewolf for 1 and a blue for a 1/1. Suspicious Stowaway can't be blocked. Whenever Suspicious Stowaway deals combat damage to a player, draw a card, then discard a card. It has Daybound. Nightbound side, it actually becomes a green card. as Seafaring Werewolf. Seafaring as a 2/1 creature. Seafaring Werewolf can't be blocked. Whenever Seafaring Werewolf deals combat damage to a player, draw a card, and it has Nightbound. Next card is Overwhelmed Archivist. It's a human wizard for 2 and a blue for a 3/2. When Overwhelmed Archivist enters the battlefield, draw a card, then discard a card. And it has Disturb for 3 and a blue. So, it then becomes a spirit wizard called Archive Haunt for 2 and 1. As a 2/1 creature with flying. Whenever Archive Haunt attacks, draw a card, then discard a card. And then if Archive Haunt would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. We've already gone over Wake the Slaughter. Next is Brood Weaver. It's a spider that costs 3 and a green for a 2/4 with reach, and whenever Brood Spider dies, create a 1/2 green spider creature token with reach. Next card is Dawnheart Mentor. It's a human warlock for 2 and a green for a 0/4. Whenever Dawnheart Mentor enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 white human creature token. It also has Coven for 5 and a green. Target creature you control gets +3/+3 and gains trample till end of turn. Activate only if you control 3 or more creatures with different powers. Next card is Audric's Outrider. It's a human knight, costs 3 and a white for a 2/4. Whenever Audric's Outrider or another creature you control dies, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Next up, we have Sungold Sentinel. It's a human soldier, costs 1 and a white for a 3/2. It says whenever Sungold Sentinel enters the battlefield or attacks, exile up to 1 target card from a graveyard. Coven for 1 and a white. Choose a color. Sungold Sentinel gains hexproof from that color till end of turn and can be blocked by creatures of the chosen color this turn. Activate only if you have creatures with 3 or more. If you control 3 or more creatures with different powers. We've already went over Willow Guys, so let's go ahead and go over Duel for Dominance. It's an instant for 1 and a green, has Coven. Choose target creature you control and target creature you don't control. If you control 3 or more creatures with different powers, put a +1/+1 counter on the chosen creature you control. Then the chosen creatures fight each other. Next up is Sacred Fire. It's an instant for a red and a white. Sacred Fire deals 2 damage to any target. You gain 2 life. And flashback 4 red and a white. We've already went over Curse of Surveillance. Next up is Mystic Skull. It's an artifact that costs 2. With pay 1 tap, add 1 mana of any color. Or pay 5 tap, transform Mystic Skull. It transforms into Mystic Monstrosity, artifact creature construct as a 5/6. Lands you control half tap, add 1 mana of any color. And then Diregraph Horde is a zombie for a 4 and a black for a 3/4. Whenever Diregraph Horde enters the battlefield, create 2 2/2 black zombie creature tokens with Decayed. When you do, exile up to 2 target cards from graveyards. Next up, we have Dryad's Revival. It's a sorcery for 2 and a green. Return target card from your graveyard to your hand. Flashback 4 and a green. We've already went over Mask of Gristlebrand. So the next card is Intrepid Adversary. It's a human scout for 1 and a white for a 3/1. Has a lifelink, and when Intrepid Adversary enters the battlefield, you may pay 1 and a white any number of times. When you pay this cost 1 or more times, put that many Valor counters on Intrepid Adversary. Creatures you control get +1/+1 for each Valor counter on Intrepid Adversary. Next card is Sludge Monster. It's a horror for 3 and 2 blue for a 5/5. Whenever Sludge Monster enters the battlefield or attacks, put a slime counter on up to 1 other target creature. Non-horror creatures with slime counters on them lose all abilities and have base power and toughness 2/2. Next up is Bloodthirsty Adversary. It's a vampire for 1 and a red. It has haste, and when Bloodthirsty Adversary enters the battlefield, you may pay 2 and a red any number of times. When you pay this cost one or more times, put that many +1/+1 counters on Bloodthirsty Adversary, then exile up to that many target instant or sorcery cards with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard and copy them. You may cast any number of the copies without paying their mana costs. Next is Falconwrath Pit Fighter. It's a vampire warrior, costs a single red for a 2/1. With 1 red, discard a card, sacrifice a vampire, draw 2 cards, and activate only if your opponent lost life this turn. Next card is Moonveil Regent. It's a dragon for 3 and a red for a 4/4. It has flying, and whenever you cast a spell, you may discard your hand. If you do, draw a card for each of that spell's colors. When Moonveil Dragon dies, it deals X damage to any target, where X is the number of colors among permanents you control. So it's definitely kind of a wheels type strategy. Next card is Augur of Autumn. It's a human druid, costs 1 and 2 green for a 2/3. You may look at the top card of your library anytime. You may play lands from the top of your library. So definitely seems similar to like Courser of Crufix. And then it has Coven. As long as you control 3 or more creatures with different powers, you may cast creature spells from the top of your library. Next card is Consuming Blob. It's Ooze for 3 and 2 green. It says Consuming Blob's power is equal to the number of card types among cards in your graveyard, and its toughness is equal to that number +1. At the beginning of your end step, create a green Ooze creature token with this creature's power is equal to the number of cards among card types in your graveyard, and its toughness is equal to that number +1. Next card is Can't Stay Away. It's a sorcery for a white and a black. Return target creature card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gains if this creature would die, exile it instead. It has flashback 3, white, and black. Next card, because we already looked at Bloodthirsty Adversary, is Delver of Secrets. It's a human wizard, costs a single blue for a 1/1. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may look at the top card of your library. You may reveal that card. If an instant or sorcery card is revealed this way, transform Delver of Secrets. When transformed, he becomes Insectile Aberration, Human Insect, as a 3/2 with flying. Next up, and this card I actually really like personally, is Rise of the Ants. Kind of reminds me of the old Goosebump episode with giant ants. Anyway, it's a sorcery for 4 and 2 green. Create 2 3/3 green insect creature tokens. You gain 2 life. Flashback 6 and 2 green. This will be the first time insect creature tokens are not some form of 1/1 with an ability. So these are actually 3/3 insect creature tokens. So that's kind of nice to be able to have a new variety of insect creature tokens. Next card is Hostile. It's a land, tap, add colorless, or 1 tap, sacrifice a creature. Put a soul counter on Hostile. Then, if there are 3 or more soul counters on it, remove those counters, transform it, then untap it, activate only as a sorcery. When it transforms, it becomes Creeping In, artifact creature horror construct as a 3/7. Whenever Creeping In attacks, you may exile a card from your graveyard. If you do, each opponent loses X life and you gain X life, where X is the number of creature cards exiled with Creeping In. And then for 4, Creeping In phases out. Next up, we have Ritual of Hope. It's an instant for 4 and a white, or 1 and a white, sorry. Creatures you control get +1/+1 till end of turn. And Coven, if you control 3 or more creatures with different powers, creatures you control get +1 or +2/+1 till end of turn instead. Alright, so the next card that we have is the Adeline Resplendent Cather. It's a legendary creature, human knight, costs 1 and 2 white. It's a star 4 creature with vigilance, and Adeline Resplendent Cather's power is equal to the number of creatures you control. Whenever you attack for each opponent, create a 1/1 white human creature token that's tapped in attacking that player or a planeswalker they control. Next card is going to be the Root Coil Creeper. It's a plant horror that costs a green and a blue for a 2/2. Tap, add 1 mana of any color. Tap, add 2 mana of any one color. Spend this mana only to cast spells from your graveyard. And for green and a blue, tap, exile Root Coil Creeper. Return target card with flashback you own from exile to your hand. So that's actually an interesting card to be able to get a card from exile back. Next card is Grizzly Ghoul. It is a zombie bear that costs 2, a black and a green for a 4/3. It has Trample, and Grizzly Ghoul enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it for each creature that died this turn. So it's definitely a second main phase kind of creature, or an aristocrats deck where you constantly stack your creatures to be able to then enter the battlefield with a lot of +1/+1 counters. Next card is Flare of Faith. It's an instant that costs 1 and a white. Target creature gets +2/+2 till end of turn. If it's a human, instead it gets +3/+3 and gains indestructible till end of turn. So this is kind of like for human decks, it's similar to the Heroic Intervention, but it does only target a single creature. But giving it +3/+3 and indestructible is definitely a nice thing to have. Next card is Necrosynthesis. It's an enchantment aura, costs 1 and a black, enchant creature. Enchanted creature has, whenever another creature dies, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. When an enchanted creature dies, look at the top X cards of your library, where X is its power. Put one of those cards into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. Next card we have is Old Stick Fingers, a legendary creature horror for X, a black, and a green for ***. When you cast a spell, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal X creature cards. Put all creature cards revealed this way into your graveyard, then put the rest in the bottom of your library in a random order. Old Stick Fingers' power and toughness are each equal to the number of creature cards in your graveyard. So it's definitely a wants to go into a deck or be the commander of a deck that heavily relies on filling up that graveyard and graveyard recursion. Next card is Borrowed Time. It's an enchantment for 2 and a white. When Borrowed Time enters the battlefield, exile target non-land permanent and opponent controls until Borrowed Time leaves the battlefield. So yeah, we've seen this type of card printed several times just to play it, exile non-land permanent opponent controls until it leaves the battlefield. So kind of to be expected to have a card like that in this set. Next card is Startle. It's an instant for 1 and a blue. Target creature gets -2/-0 till end of turn. Create a 2/2 black zombie creature token with Decayed. Next up, we have Puppet Stitcher. It's a human wizard, costs 2 and a blue for a 2/3. It says whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token with Decayed. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 3 or more creature tokens, you may transform Puppet Stitcher. Transformed, it becomes Puppet Factory as an artifact. Creature tokens you control lose all abilities and have base power and toughness 3/3. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may transform Puppet Factory. So what's interesting about this, if you create a lot of 1/1s that normally don't have abilities anyway, you actually get to beef up your creature tokens' base power and toughness. So that can definitely be helpful. Next card is Arlen, the Pack's Hope. It is a legendary planeswalker, Arlen, for 2, a red and a green. Comes in with 4 loyalty counters. Has Daybound. +1, until end of turn, you may cast creature spells as though they had flash, and each creature you control enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. -3, create 2 2/2 green wolf creature tokens. And on the Nightbound side, we have Arlen, the Moon's Fury. +2, add red-green. And 0 until end of turn, Arlen Moon's Fury becomes a 5/5 werewolf creature with trample, indestructible, and haste. So it definitely protects itself for the 0 ability, as well as when it becomes a werewolf with all the other lords and other benefits that you can have with werewolf synergies. This can actually be really deadly. Alright, going on next is Vanquish the Horde. It's a sorcery. Oh, actually, we've already went over this one. This is just a different artwork. It's basically a potential 2 white board wipe. Next is Sunset Rivalry, sorcery for 1 and a white. If your opponent has more life than you, you gain 4 life. If your opponent controls more creatures than you, create 2/2 white. 2/1/1 white human creature tokens. If your opponent has more cards in hand than you, draw a card. Next card is Hungry for More. It's a sorcery for a black and a red. Create a 3/1 black and red vampire creature token with trample, lifelink, and haste. Sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. Flashback 1 black and red. Next up, we have Brayer Bridge Tracker. Human Scout costs 2 and a green. For a 2/3, it has Vigilance, and when Brayer Bridge Tracker enters the battlefield, investigate. As long as you control a token, Brayer Bridge Tracker gets +2/+0. Next card, we have a Spectral Adversary. It's a spirit, costs 1 and a blue, flash and flying. For a 2/1, when Spectral Adversary enters the battlefield, you may pay 1 and a blue any number of times. When you pay this cost 1 or more times, put that many +1/+1 counters on Spectral Adversary. Then up to that many other target artifact creatures and or enchantments phase out. Next card is Loyal Griff. It's a hippogriff that costs 2 and a white for a 2/2, has flash flying, and when Loyal Griff enters the battlefield, you may return another creature you control to its owner's hand. Next up is Chaplain of Alms. It's a human cleric, costs a single white for a 1/1, has first strike, ward 1, and disturb for 3 and a white. On its disturb side, it becomes Chapel Shieldgeist. As a spirit cleric for 2/1, flying first strike, each creature you control has ward 1. If Chapelgeist would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. We've already went over the Moonveil Regent. So, actually no, maybe we haven't. So Moonveil Regent's a dragon for 3 and a red, flying. Whenever you cast a spell, you may discard your hand. If you do, draw a card for each of that spell's colors. When Moonveil Regent dies, it deals X damage to any target, where X is the number of colors among permanents you control, and it is a 4/4. Next card is Grafted Identity. It's an enchantment aura, 2 and 2 blue. As an additional cost to cast a spell, sacrifice a creature, enchant creature. You control enchanted creature gets +1/+1. Next card is Mysterious Tome. It's an artifact for 2 and a blue. 2 tap, draw a card, transfer Mysterious Tome. On the backside, it becomes Chilling Chronicle artifact. For 1 tap, tap target non-land permanent, transform Chilling Chronicle. Next card is Nebelgast Intruder. It's a spirit, costs 2 and a blue for a 2/1, has flash flying, and when Nebelgast Intruder enters the battlefield, up to 1 creature an opponent controls gets -2/-0 till end of turn. Next card is Covert Cutpurse. It's a human rogue, 2 and a black. When Covert Cutpurse enters the battlefield, destroy target creature you don't control that was dealt damage this turn. It's a 2/1 creature. It also has Disturb for 4 and a black. On its Disturb side, it becomes Covetous Geist, Spirit Rogue for 2/2. Flying Death Touch. When Covetous Geist would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. Next card is Burly Breaker, Human Werewolf for 3 and 2 green as a 6/5 with Ward 1 and Daybound. Nightbound side is Dire Drain Demolisher, Ward 3, Nightbound for an 8/7. Next up, we have Tainted Adversary. It's a zombie for 1 and a black for a 2/3 with Death Touch. And when Tainted Adversary enters the battlefield, you may pay 2 and a black any number of times. When you pay this cost 1 or more times, you may put that many +1/+1 counters on Tainted Adversary, then create twice that many 2/2 black zombie creature tokens with Decayed. Next card is, let's see. Yeah, we've already done Candle Grove Witch. Or maybe we haven't. We'll go over it. So, Hedgewitch Mask. It's an artifact equipment for a white. Equipped creatures get +1/+1. Equipped creature can be blocked by creatures with power 4 or greater, equipped for 2. Next card is Ritual Guardian. It's a human soldier for 2 and a white for a 3/2 with Coven. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if you control 3 or more creatures with different powers, Ritual Guardian gains lifelink until end of turn. Next card is the Sogol Barrage. It's an instant, 2 and a white, destroy target creature with toughness 4 or greater. So let's go over the Candle Grove Witch. It's a human warlock, 1 and a white for a 2/2 with Coven. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if you control 3 or more creatures with different powers, Candle Grove Witch gains flying until end of turn. Next card is Celestis Sanctifier. It's human cleric for 2 and a white for a 3/2. It is neither day or night. It becomes day as Celestis Sanctifier enters the battlefield. When day becomes night or night becomes day, look at the top 2 cards of your library. Put one of them into your graveyard. Next card is Covetous Castaway. It's a human, costs 1 and a white, or 1 and a blue, sorry, for a 1/3. When Covetous Castaway dies, mill 3 cards. It has Disturb for 3 and 2 blue. And on the Disturb side, it becomes Ghostly Castigator. It is a spear for 3/4. It has flying. When Ghostly Castigator enters the battlefield, you may shuffle up to 3 target cards from your graveyard into your library. If Ghostly Castigator would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. Next up is Patrician Geist. It's a Spirit Knight, costs 2 and a blue for a 2/2. Has flying. Other spirits you control get +1/+1, so it's a lord for spirits. And spells you cast from the graveyard cost 1 less to cast. So this could help with the Disturb cost. Next up is Corpse Cobble. It's an instant for a blue and a black. As an additional as an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice any number of creatures. Create an XX blue and black zombie creature token with Menace, where X is the total power of sacrificed creatures. Has flashback for 3, a blue and a black. Next card is Intrepid Adversary. Human Scout, 1 and a white, lifelink. When Intrepid Adversary enters the battlefield, you may pay 1 and a white any number of times. When you pay the cost 1 or more times, put that many Valor counters on Intrepid Adversary. Creatures you control get +1/+1 for each Valor counter on Intrepid Adversary, and it is a 3/1 creature. Next up, Augur of Autumn, Human Druid, 1 and 2 green for a 2/3. With, you may look at the top card of your library anytime, you may play lands from the top of your library, and Coven as long as you control 3 or more creatures with different powers, you may cast creature spells from the top of your library. Next card is Turn the Earth. It's an instant for a single green. I actually like this card quite a bit. Choose up to 3 cards in graveyards. The owner of those cards shuffles them into their libraries. You gain 2 life. Flashback 1 and a green. Defend of the Celestis. It's an instant for 2 and 2 green. Distribute 3 +1/+1 counters among 1, 2, or 3 target creatures you control. This card is so important, especially if you really want to run several different Coven type cards to be able to manipulate the total powers of creatures you control to then be able to potentially get the Coven ability to go off on your creatures. Next up is Putrefied Dragon. It's a dragon that costs 3 and 2 red for a 4/3. It has flying, and whenever Putrefying Dragon attacks, it deals 1 damage to target creature defending player controls. If that creature is a zombie, Putrefying Dragon deals 2 damage to it instead. Next up, we have Immolation, it's an enchantment aura, costs a single red. Enchant creature, enchanted creature gets +2/+2. Next up, we have Voldaren Ambusher. It's a vampire archer that's cost 2 and a red for a 2/2. When Voldaren Ambusher enters the battlefield, if an opponent lost life this turn, deals X damage to up to one target creature or planeswalker, where X is the number of vampires you control. Next card is Lisa, Forgotten Archangel. It's an angel that costs 2 white and a black for a 4/5 creature. Has flying and lifelink. Whenever another non-token creature you control dies, return that card to the owner's hand at the beginning of the next end step. If a creature an opponent controls would die, exile it instead. Next card is Dawnheart Warden's Human Warlock for 1, a green and a white for a 3/3 with Vigilance. And Coven, at the beginning of combat on your turn, if you control 3 or more creatures with different powers, creatures you control get +1/+0 till end of turn. Next card is Ghoul Caller's Harvest. It's a sorcery. Costs black green. Create X 2/2 black zombie creature tokens with Decayed, where X is half the number of creature cards in your graveyard rounded up. Has flashback for a black and a green. Next card, with a little bit of a creepy artwork, is Flesh Taker. It's a human assassin for a white and black for a 2/2. Whenever you sacrifice another creature, you gain 1 life and scry 1. Then 1 and sacrifice another creature. Flesh Taker gets +2/+2 till end of turn. Next up, we have Diregraph Rebirth. It's a sorcery for 3 black and a green. This spell costs 1 less to cast for each creature that died this turn. Return target creature from your graveyard to the battlefield, and it has flashback for 5 black and green. Next, we have Sludge Monster. It's a horror for 3 and 2 blue. When Sludge Monster enters the battlefield or attacks, put a slime counter on up to 1 other target creature. Non-horror creatures with slime counters on them lose all abilities and have base power and toughness 2/2. This is probably one of my favorite cards that's going to be coming out in this set that I do want to own a few copies of. And it's Unnatural Growth. It's an enchantment that costs 1 and 4 green. At the beginning of each combat, double the power and toughness of each creature you control till end of turn. Next up, we have Croaking Counterpart. It's a sorcery for 1, a green and a blue. Create a token that's a copy of target non-frog creature, except it's a 1/1 green frog. Flashback for 3 green and blue. Next card is Faithful Mending. It's an instant for a white and blue. You gain 2 life, draw 2 cards, then discard 2 cards. Has flashback for a 1, a white, and a blue. Next card is Ghoulish Procession. It's an enchantment for 1 and a black. Whenever 1 or more non-token creature dies, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token with Decayed. Activate this this ability triggers only once each turn. Next up, we have Graveyard Trespasser. It's a human werewolf, costs 2 and a black for a 3/3. Has Ward, discard a card. Whenever Graveyard Trespasser enters the battlefield or attacks, exile up to 1 target card from a graveyard. If a creature card was exiled this way, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life, and has Daybound. So on the Nightbound side, it is Graveyard Glutton. It's a werewolf 4/4 with Ward, discard a card. Whenever Graveyard Glutton enters the battlefield or attacks, exile up to 2 target cards from graveyards. For each creature card exiled this way, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. Has Nightbound. Next card is Vampire Socialite. A Vampire Noble, costs black and a red for a 2/2, has Menace. And when Vampire Socialite enters the battlefield, if an opponent lost life this turn, put a +1/+1 counter on each other vampire you control. As long as an opponent lost life this turn, each other vampire you control enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. Next up is Champion of the Perished. It's a zombie, costs a single black for a 1/1. When another zombie enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Champion of the Perished. Next card is Brutal Cather. It's a human soldier werewolf, costs 2 and a white for a 2/2. When this creature enters the battlefield or transforms into Brutal Cather, exile target creature an opponent controls until this card leaves the battlefield. Has Daybound. So on Nightbound, it becomes a red Moonrage Brute for as a 3/3 with first strike, ward, pay 3 life, and Nightbound. Next card is Dawnhar Rejuvenator. It's a human warlock, costs 3 and a green for a 2/4. When Dawnhar Rejuvenator enters the battlefield, you gain 3 life, and it has tap, add 1 mana of any color. Next card is Enduring Angel. It's an angel that costs 2 and 3 white for a 3/3. Has flying and double strike. You have hexproof. If your life total would be reduced to 0 or less, instead transform Enduring Angel and your life total becomes 3. Then if Enduring Angel didn't transform this way, you lose the game. So if someone tries to copy this card while it's on the other side, they would then possibly lose the game. So it's Angelic Enforcer, flying if you have hexproof. So star and Angelic Enforcer's power and toughness are each equal to your life total. When Angelic Enforcer attacks, double your life total. So if you're really low on life, it could potentially help you boost up your life total fairly quick. Next up we have Gavany Downguard. It's a human soldier, 1 and 2 white for a 3/3 with ward 1. If it's neither day or night, it becomes day as Gavany Downguard enters the battlefield. Whenever day becomes night or night becomes day, look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature card with mana value 3 or less from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. Next up is Sereth the Viper's Fang. This card I actually really like. It's a human warlock, costs 2 and 2 green for a 3/4. Other tapped creatures you control have Death Touch. So when you tap an attack with a creature, it suddenly has Death Touch. And then other untapped creatures you control have Hexproof. And then for 1 and tap, untap another target creature or land you control. Next up, we have Devoted Graphkeeper. It's a human peasant, costs white and blue for a 2/1. When Devoted Graphkeeper enters the battlefield, mill 2 cards. Whenever you cast a spell from your graveyard, tap target creature you don't control, and it has Disturb for 1 white and blue. On the Disturb side, it becomes Departed Soulkeeper, a spirit with 3/1 with flying, and Departed Soulkeeper can block only creatures with flying. If Departed Soulkeeper would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, exile instead. Next up we have Flame Channeler. Human Wizard, costs 1 and a red for a 2/2. When a spell you control deals damage, transform Flame Channeler. When it's transformed, it becomes Embodiment of Flame. It's an elemental wizard for as a 3/3. Whenever a spell you control deals damage, put a flame counter on Embodiment of Flame. And you can pay 1, remove a flame counter from Embodiment of Flame, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. Next card is Fangblade Brigand. It's a human werewolf, costs 3 and a red for a 3/4. 1 and a red, Fangblade Brigand gets +1/+0 and gains first strike till end of turn. Has Daybound. Nightbound side, it becomes Fangblade Eviscerator. It's a werewolf for 4/5. For 1 and a red, Fangblade Eviscerator gets +1/+0 and gains first strike till end of turn. 4 and a red, creatures you control get +2/+0 till end of turn. It has Nightbound. Next up is actually a reprint. It is Pithing Needle. It's an artifact that costs 1. As Pithing Needle enters the battlefield, choose a card name. Activated abilities of sources with the chosen name can't be activated unless they're mana abilities. We've already went over Curse of Silence, so the next card is the Celestus. It's a legendary artifact that costs 3. If it's neither day or night, it becomes day as the Celestus enters the battlefield. Tap, add 1 mana of any color. 3 and tap. If it's night, it becomes day, otherwise it becomes night. Activate only as a sorcery. So this helps control your day and night cycle. And then whenever day becomes night or night becomes day, you gain 1 life. You may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. So yeah, this, especially if you're doing heavy with werewolves, you definitely want to have this card in your deck because it's going to be a lot easier to become day than it is to stay night. So to be able to intentionally manipulate the day-night cycle is going to be very beneficial to you. Next up we have Kessig Naturalist. It's a human werewolf, costs a red and a green for a 2/2. Whenever Kessig Naturalist attacks, add red or green. Until end of turn, you don't lose this mana as steps and phases end. Has Daybound. Nightbound, it's Lord of the Ulvenwald. Werewolf 3/3. Other wolves and werewolves you control get +1/+1. Whenever Lord of the Ulvenwald attacks, add red or green. Until end of turn, you don't lose this mana as steps and phases end. Has Nightbound. Next up, we have Lunar Frenzy. It's an instant, costs X and a red. Target creature you control gets +X/+O, and first strike and trample until end of turn. Next up, we have Falconwrath Pit Fighter. It's a vampire warrior, costs a single red for a 2/1. 1 in red, discard a card, sacrifice a vampire, draw 2 cards, activate only if an opponent lost life this turn. Blade Stitch Scabe, it's a zombie soldier, costs a blue and a black for a 2/3. Other zombies you control get +1/+O. Next card is Larder Zombie. It's a zombie, costs a single blue for a 1/3. It has Defender. Tap 3 untapped creatures you control. Look at the top card of your library. You may put it into your graveyard. Next card is Dissipate. It's an instant, costs 1 and 2 blue. Counter target spell. If that spell is countered this way, exile it instead of putting it into its owner's graveyard. Next up is Hobbling Zombie. It's a zombie, costs 2 and a single black. For a 2/2, has Death Touch. When Hobbling Zombie dies, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token with Decayed. Next card we have is Gisa, Glorious Resurrector. It's a human wizard, costs 2 and 2 black for a 4/4. If a creature an opponent controls would die, exile it instead. At the beginning of your upkeep, put all creatures exiled with Gisa Glorious Resurrector onto the battlefield under your control. They gain Decayed. So this is kind of like Terragrid, except they gain Decayed, and it doesn't deal with anything with discarding, so it's like a nerfed version of Terragrid. Next up is Siege Zombie. It's a zombie for 1 and a black. That's a 2/2, tap, and has tap 3 untapped creatures you control. Each opponent loses 1 life. Next card is Clear Shot. It's an instant for 2 and a green. Target creature you control gets +1/+1 till end of turn. It deals damage equal to its power to target creature you do not control. Next card is Locked in the Cemetery. It's an enchantment aura for 1 and a blue. Enchant creature, when locked in the cemetery, enters the battlefield. If there are 5 or more cards in your graveyard, tap enchanted creature. Enchanted creature doesn't untap during its controller's untap step. See, we have Rite of Harmony. Rite of Harmony is an instant for a green and a white. Whenever a creature or enchantment enters the battlefield under your control this turn, draw a card. It has flashback for 2, a green and a white. Next up, we have Consuming Blob. Creature Ooze. Actually, nope, we went over this one as well. So let's go over Curse of Leeches. Enchantment or Curse, costs 2 and a black. Enchant player. As this permanent transforms into Curse of Leeches, attach it to a player. At the beginning of enchanted player's upkeep, they lose 1 life, you gain 1 life. And it has Daybound. Nightbound side. Leeching Lurker. It's a Leech Horror 4/4 with lifelink and Nightbound. Next card is the Baneblade Scoundrel. It's a human rogue werewolf, 3 and a black for a 4/3. That has whenever Baneblade Scoundrel becomes blocked, each creature blocking it gets -1/-1 till end of turn. Has Daybound. Nightbound side is Baneclaw Marauder. It's a werewolf, has a 5/4. Whenever Baneclaw Marauder becomes blocked, each creature blocking it gets -1/-1 till end of turn. Whenever a creature blocking Baneclaw Marauder dies, that creature's controller loses 1 life, and it has Nightbound. Next up, we have Thermo Alchemist. It's a human shaman for 1 and a red for a 0/3. Has Defender and tap. Thermo Alchemist deals 1 damage to each opponent. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, untap Thermo Alchemist. Next card is Geist Flame Reservoir. It's an artifact with 2 and a red. When you cast an instant or sorcery spell, put a charge counter on Geist Flame Reservoir. For 1 a red, tap Geist Flame, or remove any number of charge counters from Geist Flame Reservoir. It deals that much damage to any target. And for 1 in a red, tap exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. Next card is Heirloom Mirror. It's an artifact that costs 1 in a black. And 1 tap and pay 1 life and discard a card, so heavy cost to even do anything with this. Draw a card, mill a card, then put a ritual counter on Heirloom Mirror. Then if it has 3 or more ritual counters on it, remove them and transform it, activate only as a sorcery. So I don't see this card being too good, because that requires you to do a whole lot of things you normally wouldn't want to all do together, just to flip it over. And then it becomes Inherited Fiend Demon. It's a 4/4 with flying. 2 in a black, exile target creature from a graveyard, put a +1/+1 counter on Inherited Fiend. Yeah, this card's not that good. You're having to do so much to not get much back. And it costs 1 and a black for an artifact to turn into a creature, but yeah, that's not good. Next card is Can't Stay Away, has all the little kitties on it. It's a sorcery, white and a black. Return target creatures with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gains if this creature would die, exile it instead, and has flashback for 3, a white and a black. Next card is Foul Play. It's a sorcery. Destroy target creature with power 2 or less. It has Investigate, and it costs 1 and a black. Next card is Village Watch. It's a human werewolf, 4 and a red, for a 4/3 with haste and daybound. Nightbound side, it is Village Reavers. It's a werewolf 5/4 werewolf, and wolves and werewolves you control have haste. Next card is Famished Foragers. It's a vampire, costs 3 and a red for a 4/3. When Famished Foragers enters the battlefield, if an opponent lost life this turn, add red, red, red. And for 2 and a red, discard a card, draw a card. Next up is Stormrider Spirit. It's a spirit for 4 and blue for a 3/3 with flash and flying, so pretty simple on that one. Next up is Ominous Roost. It's an enchantment that costs 2 and a blue. Whenever Ominous Roost enters the battlefield, or whenever you cast a spell from your graveyard, create a 1/1 blue bird creature token with flying, and this creature can block only creatures with flying. Next up, we have Brimstone Vandal. It's a devil that costs 2 and a red for a 2/3. Has menace, and if it's neither day or night, it becomes day as Brimstone Vandal enters the battlefield. Whenever day becomes night or night becomes day, Brimble Vandal deals 1 damage to each opponent. Next up, we have Defenstrate. It's a weird named card. It's an instant for 2 and a black. Destroy target creature without flying. This is like Plummet, but it costs 1 extra mana, and not really worth it in my opinion. Next up is Jader, Ghoul Caller of Nephalia. It's a human wizard, 1 and a black. At the beginning of your end step, if you control no creatures with Decayed, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token with Decayed. It's a 1/1 creature. Next up, we have Arrogant Outlaw. Vampire Noble, costs 2 and a black for a 3/2. When Arrogant Outlaw enters the battlefield, if an opponent lost life this turn, each opponent loses 2 life, you gain 2 life. Next up, probably the most anticipated werewolf card, especially for Commander, is Tovolar, Dire Overlord. It's a legendary creature human werewolf, costs 1 a red and a green for a 3/3. And says whenever a wolf or a werewolf you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 3 or more wolves and or werewolves, it becomes night, and then transform any number of human werewolves you control. and then it has Daybound. So Nightbound side, it is Tovalar, the Midnight Scourge, legendary creature werewolf, has a 4/4. When a wolf or a werewolf you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. And for X red green, target wolf or werewolf you control gets +X/+0 and gains trample till end of turn, and has Nightbound. Secrets of the Key. It's an instant that costs a single blue. It has Investigate. If this spell was cast from a graveyard, investigate twice instead, and it has Flashback for 3 and a blue. Next up is Sigarda, Champion of Light. It's a legendary creature angel. Costs 1 a green and 2 white. It's a 4/4. Has Flying Trample. Humans you control get +1/+1. And Coven, when Sigarda attacks, if you control 3 or more creatures with different powers, look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal a human creature card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest of the bottom of your library in a random order. So it's definitely good for especially like a human tribal type deck. We've already went over Puppet Stitcher, so now let's go over the special dual lands in this set. First off, we have Deserted Beach. Deserted Beach enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more other lands. Tap, add white or blue. Next up is Haunted Ridge. Haunted Ridge enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more lands, and has tap, add black or red. Next up is Overgrown Farmland. Overgrown Farmland enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more other lands. Has tap to add green or white. Next is Rockfall Vale. Rockfall Vale enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more lands. Tap, add red or green. Next is the Shipwreck Marsh. Shipwreck Marsh enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more other lands. Tap, add blue or black. Next card we have Champion of the Perished. It's a zombie, costs a single black for a 1/1. When another zombie enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Champion of the Perished. Next up we have Brutal Cather. It's a human soldier werewolf, costs 2 and a white for a 2/2. When this creature enters the battlefield or transforms into Brutal Cather, exile target creature an opponent controls until this creature leaves the battlefield. It has Daybound. Yep, so we've already went over that one. Let's go over to Might of the Old Ways. It's an instant, costs 1 and a green. Target creature gets +2/+2 till end of turn. And Coven. Then, if you control 3 or more creatures with different powers, draw a card. Next card is Candle Trap. It's an enchantment aura that costs a single white. Enchant creature. Enchanted creature has Defender. Prevent all combat damage that would be dealt by enchanted creature. And Coven, 2 white and sacrifice Candle Trap. Exile enchanted creature. Activate only if you control 3 or more creatures with different powers. Next card is Candlelit Cavalry. It's a human knight, costs 4 and a green for a 5/5. And Coven, at the beginning of combat on your turn, if you control 3 or more creatures with different powers, Candlelit Cavalry gains trample until end of turn. Next we have Bait Hook Angler. It's a human peasant, 1 and a blue for a 2/1. Has Disturb for 1 and a blue. On the Disturb side, it becomes Hook Haunt Drifter. It's a spear as a 1/2, flying. If Hook Haunt Drifter would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. Next is Tavern Ruffian. It's a human warrior werewolf for a 3 and a red for a 2/5 with Daybound. Nightbound, it becomes Tavern Smasher werewolf as a 6/5 with Nightbound. Next up we have Beloved Beggar. It's a human peasant, 1 and a white for a 0/4 with Disturb 4 and 2 white. On the Disturb side, it's Generous Soul Spirit as a 4/4 flying vigilance. If Generous Soul would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. Next up is Light Up the Night. It's a sorcery, cost X and a red. Light Up the Night deals X damage to any target. If X, it deals X +1 damage instead if target creature is a creature or planeswalker. Flashback for 3 and a red, and remove X loyalty counters from among planeswalkers you control. If you cast this spell this way, X cannot be 0. Next up is the Galvanic Iteration. It's an instant, costs blue and a red. When you cast your next instant or sorcery spell this turn, copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the copy and has flashback for a 1 blue and red. Next up is Contortionist Trope. It's a human, costs X in green for a 0/0. Contortionist Trope enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. Coven, at the beginning of your end step, if you control 3 or more creatures with different powers, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. So this again will actually help continually be able to get off Coven by manipulating one creature to help your creatures have different powers. Next card is Howl of the Hunt. It's an enchantment aura, costs 2 and a green, has flash, and enchant creature. When Howl of the Hunt enters the battlefield, if enchanted creature is a wolf or werewolf, untap that creature. Enchanted creature gets +2/+2 and has vigilance. Next up is Snarling Wolf. It's a wolf that costs a single green as a 1/1, and pay 1 and a green. Snarling Wolf gets +2/+2 till end of turn. Activate only once each turn. Next is Pestilent Wolf. It's a wolf that costs 1 and a green for a 2/2, and you can pay 2 and a green. Pestilent Wolf gains Death Touch till end of turn. Next up we have Festival Crasher. It's a devil, costs 1 and a red for a 1/3. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, Festival Crasher gets +2/+0 till end of turn. An Unruly Mob. It's a human, costs 1 and a white as for a 1/1. Whenever another creature you control dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Unruly Mob. Then these are going to be the full art, special art lands of the set. It has the color of the land as a little like etched border around the card, and then the rest is a black and white picture. So I definitely think those are pretty interesting. I really like the swamps out of all of them. Then we have some other lands that will be in the set. And then next we have Wrenn and 7. It's a legendary Planeswalker Wrenn, costs 3 and 2 green. It starts off with 5 loyalty counters. +1, reveal the top 4 cards of your library. Put all lands revealed this way into your hand and the rest into your graveyard. For 0, put any number of land cards from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. -3, create a green tree folk creature token with reach, and this creature's power and toughness are each equal to the number of lands you control. And -8, return all permanent cards from your graveyard to your hand. You gain an emblem with you have no maximum hand size. Next we have Infernal Grasp. It's an instant for 1 and a black. Destroy target creature, you lose 2 life. Next is Play with Fire. It's an instant, costs a single red, sorry. Play with Fire deals 2 damage to any target. If a player was dealt damage this way, scry 1. Next card is Consider. It's an instant, costs a single blue. Look at the top card of your library. You may put that card into your graveyard and draw a card. We've already went over Triskaidekaphile, Gambit of Paris, Infernal Grasp, Play with Fire, and so Join the Dance. The very last card. Join the Dance is a sorcery that costs a green and a white. Create 2 1/1 white human creature tokens and has flashback for 3 and a white. I definitely hope that you enjoyed this giant spoiler breakdown of all these Innistrad Midnight Hunt cards. This video definitely is a longer video, but we just sat down and bared through quite some time to be able to go through all of the cards of the entire set. So that is what we have for Innistrad Midnight Hunt for the fully spoiled and released cards of the set. Definitely feel free to go ahead and leave a thumbs up and like on this video, and feel free to comment your thoughts on what you think of this set, and cards you wish you would have seen return. And as always, have a great day. And definitely be sure to check out this video and others on my channel and hit that subscribe button right there in the corner if you haven't already.